Are you ready to become a change maker? Our 48-week postgraduate program in public policy or the PGP may be just the thing for you. This hybrid program is designed to give you both the theoretical foundation and hands-on experience needed to excel in policy making. With a mix of expert-led webinars, in-person workshops, and policy simulation exercises, you'll gain real-world skills along with personalized mentorship. Through our policy programs, we connect good people to good ideas and good networks. Apply now at the link in the description to make an impact.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Suman, your host for today, and I'm joined by my colleagues and fellow film and music buffs, Shobhankita and Kripa. Hi Shobhankita, hi Kripa.
Hi Suman, thanks for having us.
Super excited to be here, Suman.
Yeah, this episode actually springs from a discussion that was started by Shobhankita, and this is about the culture of dissent as reflected in mainstream cinema. We are building from that, and we will try to do something different. As you've seen, the topic itself is something that we don't usually do, right? But we're trying something different here. We're going to put out our views on the topic, of course. We are going to try and analyze possible trends and reflect on why something is happening. We may not land on any concrete solution, but we would like to open this space up for listeners to reflect on. Just to give context, cinema has often reflected society in many ways. You see it in the movies where current issues and affairs are given a cinematic twist, and these are reflected on screen. All through the years, we've seen artists having used cinema to voice their opinions on the state of the economy, the society, and the government of the day. In some sense, they reflect the society as much as they influence it. Okay? We, however, are living in very interesting times. According to us, there is a decline in movies that critique the establishment of the day. To discuss this descent of dissent and its implication on the quality of democratic discourse, I will now open the discussion with two of my colleagues. We'll start with Shobhankita. She'll give us a kind of a lay of the land kind of context, and we'll go from there. Shobhankita, your views on this, please.
Thanks, Suman. So I'm going to take a cue from the title of this podcast, which is The Times They Are A-Changin, which is actually a Bob Dylan song from 1963. And this is, it was very popular, almost became an anthem at the time. And Bob Dylan, of course, I'm a fan, but, he was famous for standing up to the establishment and expressing the anti-war sentiment in the 1960s. So, 1960s, this is the US beginning to involve in the Vietnam War. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, as well as, peak Cold War. So this was him expressing the American hypocrisy, his frustrations at the war sentiment, and so on. So coming to Bollywood particularly, so it's my view that from, say, the 1950s, there are ample examples of movies that are attuned to the socioeconomic realities of the time that people are going through at the time, and are at the same time kind of anti-establishment in the sense that they point to the fact that life is difficult for people because of the government and so on, right? So multiple Guru Dutt, Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor films from 1950s and 1960s talk about how hard life was under socialistic Nehruvian times.
Yeah, but they also did give a very idealistic take on what the country should be, right? Because we were just a new nation. We were, there were a lot of dreams, aspirations, etc. I think all of it got reflected in the movies that were being made. Yes, they threw light on the pathetic condition that we were in. But yeah, and they were not censored for it, or they were not said that, nobody was telling them that, this is wrong or whatever. So they had that kind of free thing to at least throw light on societal issues, on daily, hardships faced by people around them, right?
No, and I think that's cinema's prerogative to be able to reflect, if it is something idyllic or something aspirational in a way, even if it might stray away from a very pragmatic interpretation of what the world should look like at the time. But it was interesting that from what Shobhankita is sharing, that there was a bit of a balance still. As much as they are showing this picturesque, beautiful life that we want to all sort of ascend to almost, but there was a sort of a fairly frank and very candid expression of we are not happy also with some of the struggles that we are facing. Yeah.
And the 1970s in some sense was that hope not materializing and people having waited too long for it.
Yeah.
So this is India coming out of multiple wars in 1962, 1965, 1971. Inflation is through the roof. Life is very difficult. There's corruption, there's crime, there's unemployment. So there are movies from the 70s that clearly point this trend, right? For example, Gulzar's Mere Apne actually has this really satirical fun song called Hal Chal Theek Thaak Hai, which is a satirical take on how difficult life is. And Amitabh Bachchan's Angry Young Man was essentially a manifestation of this in The Leading Man.
Yeah, and the class wars that were, that were out in the open, the divide that you could see more apparent between the rich, with the haves, have-nots, however you want. The capital versus labor, the contrast or the tension that existed, I think came out well in those movies, Diwar or even Zanjeer or Coolie or any of those, right? So, yeah, I think in that sense, yes, movies did reflect some kind of angst of a society. But from there on, it was, somewhere of a downhill, but somewhat, some salvaging parts were there to that.
I just want to add this one point of, I think typically when people think of cinema, we think of it in terms of escapism. This idea of like, I want to forget about the harsh realities that I'm confronting in everyday life, and I want to be able to lose myself in this world completely. But I think not enough attention is actually placed on the fact that it can be such a wonderful medium to reflect the struggles and to feel a sense of, I can't think of a better word, but almost a sense of solidarity, validation, that, these struggles are real, and I'm finding some way to express it. And cinema is doing such a beautiful job of doing that for me. Yeah.
I think cinema is, studying why a particular film resonates with the audience is also important because that reflects on the cultural milieu, right? It talks about where people's mindsets are. What are they thinking? What are they facing? What are they going through in their personal lives?
Yeah.
And in some sense, what works in the theaters is a reflection of that. And I think artists and professionals in the movie industry particularly have done this quite well, even in India, right? For example, the Mere Apne song, Hal Chal Theek Thaak Hai from 1971, it spoke of unemployment and so on 2 years before the government national survey actually said that there was peak unemployment in India. So this was artists being able to understand what was going on in society and being able to kind of act on it.
They may not have had data to support it, but they got the pulse of the society at large there.
Yeah.
And that's I think what makes it so potent, right? And just so, that's why we sort of are so enamored also by it in a way. Like it can be sort of a canary in the coal mine to say that, I can see what's coming up here. Yeah. And that's a notorious case, I think, across like, media and art and culture has been able to pick up on some of the nuance of some of this well before. Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. The best filmmakers are always prescient. They're ahead of the time, right? Yeah.
So good. Yeah.
So 80s again, like Suman, you were indicating, was a difficult time in general for Bollywood. It's considered the dark ages. We had the underworld funding it. It was black money coming in. It was a sort of informal economy. The industry wasn't necessarily recognized by the government. So I think we don't necessarily have too many examples of this. It was a difficult time for the industry as a whole. But 90s again throws up very many good movies, right? And Mani Ratnam films, for example, are an example of that. Unlike today,
so cutting edge in a way.
Yeah. And it was the original pan-Indian film, right? There were many of them were first made in Tamil and then kind of dubbed and released and had a pan-Indian audience. Roja about Kashmir, Bombay about the Muslim Hindu riots in the 90s, 1995 and so on. in Bombay at the time. Also Iruvar, which is about DMK, IDMK, sort of a fictionalized version of that. Also Kanatil Muttamittal, which was about the Sri Lankan LTTE. So we had multiple
So bold.
examples.
Like, that's incredible, actually, when you're listing it out like that, hearing it. That's like an incredible like repertoire of films and types of stories that were existing in the public space and occupied public imagination pretty significantly. Like, these are not art house indie films that were tucked away and, a handful of people were going for limited screenings. Yeah.
I think it was also Maniratnam's genius in being able to weave personal, emotional stories against this political landscape.
These heavy themes,
right? And he was able to reach a lot of people because of just
it was
the
massy
resonance.
in a lot of ways because of the music, because of
Sure.
I love the music, but it was massy in different ways.
Lovely. It's so true.
But they did capture, and they were critiquing. They were, commenting on the current affairs, especially Bombay. If you see, you saw very, very visceral, scenes of rioting or any of that. It was out there for everyone to reflect on. But I don't know, somewhere we seem to have lost it.
But in terms of the messaging of all of these films, right, they were always calling for unity and social harmony and social stability and things like that, right? So it was always a very unifying theme in all of these films. It was anti-war, it was anti-violence, it was more for a peaceful, idyllic life. And in some sense, that was his genius to be able to have had so many people lap up these movies.
And it seems also just like a very astute sort of recognition of the potency that some of these films can have in being able to influence public sentiment. Like, it seems like a very thoughtful sort of approach to filmmaking. Yeah.
Also, going back to the 70s, for example, right? Many of the angry young man films that Salim Javed wrote, they did face political censorship. They were difficult films to get released without too many cuts. But regardless, once they were released, the public really lapped it up, and it was taken to very well.
It was a vindication of what they were trying to say.
And I found it quite surprising to learn that even Sholay ran into issues around 1975, peak emergency, about its anti-establishment theme, its themes of violence and so on. So, but we know the kind of cult classic the movie then kind of
the
became.
status it reached.
Maybe the 2000s, Rang De Basanti. Cannot speak about the 2000s without Rang De Basanti.
Rang De Basanti, yes. It captured the anger of the masses against corruption, because that was what was in the news in a lot of ways. We were looking at so many scams in the news that, that actually, angered people, but they did not know what to do about it, right? But the movie took a very... like a revolutionary stand in some sense on the thing. And so I think it kind of fueled the anger towards a certain other movement. Now, what happened after that is something else, but it did. And at that point, it was allowed. We were okay with that kind of portrayal of movies showing corruption or showing,
and taken up by mainstream, well-regarded, well-respected actors who are not shying away from saying, I would like for my art to be associated in this particular role.
Yeah, research papers have been written about how the film kind of mobilized people to become more politically aware and eventually contribute to the anti-corruption movement in 2010, 2011 that Anna Hazare led. So the film was pivotal in its music, in its themes, in its stance for revolutionary anti-corruption, right? So really a landmark film in recent times.
Brilliant.
So from there, where are we today?
Fast forward to
So I think in recent past we have had maybe a few films. So for example, Gully Boy comes to mind. Great music, especially the songs Azadi and Jingustan. Jingustan, which is a scathing indictment against Jingoism, and Azadi, which talks about pretty classic anti-establishment in peace times, which is inequality, access to basic education and water. These are the kinds of issues the song and its lyrics very tightly kind of expresses. We also had, say again in 2019, Aisi Taisi Democracy, which was Varun Grover's sort of comedy.
not so much movies, but we had the whole stand-up scene coming up at that point. That was taking on the establishment in their own quirky, fun kind of way.
Yeah, but look at the last few years, and I would argue that there are very few case studies of movies that seem to do the same. I feel like 2019 was maybe the stopgap, and after that, it's increasingly hard to find movies that are anti-establishment and political in their themes. So I think we come now to...
Yeah, if you see like recent past, you see Chava, which has like grossed really large numbers in the box office. Again, a movie that is putting forth a certain ideology, and we seem to be going back. We seem to be drawing all our inspiration or all our things from something that happened in the past. And, I don't know if that is a critique. I mean, there's nothing wrong with period films or anything like that. But the way it is put forth, what is it that it is trying to communicate is important for us to actually listen or, to at least reflect on.
It's crossed about like 7, I was just looking this up, but like about 700 to 800 crores globally. Like that's like a slightly large number.
No, so I think in terms of the kind of movies that seem to be making it big in today's culture, right? One is escapist entertainment, which is the mega blockbuster, the Pushpa 2, the RRR, the KGF, movies like that. Or historic revisionism, so go back and make movies that either reduce the nuances that history tells us to be true, or kind of, make it
glorify,
kind of make it relevant for today's political climate, disregarding, the actual events and nuances in which that history took place. So I think this is the kind of sentiment that seems to be working in the movies right now. And there was a time that Bollywood, cricket and politics was perhaps the most unifying...
Trinity.
The trinity for the Indian population, right? I mean, we come from such different cultures and regions and languages. These three were perhaps, able to cover a wide majority of people. But today we see politics being too polarizing and Bollywood kind of losing its relevance.
So that leaves us with IPL maybe.
I mean, separate episode on IPL.
IPL and with its star players coming from outside. Okay.
This is for someone's rant on the next episode of All Things Policy.
Go on.
And I'm thinking of and I think it'll be helpful to hear your thoughts on like the context in which some of these films are emerging, right? What's happening behind the scenes? Like I know, Shobhankita, you had mentioned that in the 80s, the dark days of Bollywood having a very a different sort of like puppets sort of pulling strings a little bit perhaps. But in this instance, like it seems like there's a very corporatized sort of flavor that's being introduced. Is there things that you were thinking around that?
Yeah, so it does look like... So firstly, the production houses have become too big in some sense, right? I mean, they obviously did very well for themselves, and now they're too big to be able to take certain kinds of risks. Increasingly, even, when OTT first came up, the OTT platforms first came up, they were looked upon as avenues for anti-establishment.
Finally, there'd be an opportunity to...
Yes, for also independent films, for also different kinds of voices to be publicly broadcasted. But that hasn't happened. It looks like OTT has only brought in the corporate system into Bollywood, so much so that there are single points of failure now who can then be pulled up by the establishment of the day for voices that might be anti-establishment, right? The IT rules particularly also extend to OTT platforms and also kind of make this even more difficult because there's single points of failure in these corporate structures. So it looks like the ownership structures, looks like some of these things that have changed recently and they've not at least been able to accommodate different voices as they previously were thought to have.
Were able to, absolutely. A little bit of a shame of, I think, the promise of OTT sort of being diluted sort of over time. And like you were saying, Shobhankita, with IG minority rules, 2021 was, the date where that came out. And there was a very real implication of, the code of ethics that it presented, where it, talked about, discretion in the content that that is featured, that it could affect, the sovereignty and integrity of India, national security, likely to disturb public order. So that's, pulling an excerpt from the rules itself. And beyond that, I know we had also been discussing this idea of entertainment taxes being pulled for some of these films, right? Like in passing, we mentioned Kerala Story now as an example. So that 2023, where just interesting that, in Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, we didn't actually, there was this announcement that, taxes are no longer going to be a part of this particular film. Like it's going to be made tax-free.
Kerala Story in Uttar Pradesh. I mean, why would you do that?
That's right. So just really interesting. And then, so you have this maybe where you see, like political leaders are coming for movie screenings and are making references to it in sort of public statements as well.
Speeches.
In speeches, which is remarkable. Anyway, and then beyond that as well, where there are places where some of this mainstream discourse is not being followed, or the mainstream, so the norm is not upheld in the same way. Then you have the rise of, social media mobs that are, doing this, participating more actively in a way to reinforce what should be the mainstream themes and ideas.
And why you should not go against them or whatever.
Exactly. And remarkable also to think that it's escalated to the point of death threats and just threat of violence, actually for straying away too far from what should be the supposed standard of what mainstream ideas and discourse should look like. We were talking of examples of movies like Padmavat, which similarly brought up some of these concerns.
So I think Padmavat was that rare film that actually got multiple organizations angry, and Bollywood became the common enemy, right? Because
Padmavat 2018, eh? So just before,
So, for example, Rajput caste organizations were angry. Some Muslim organizations were angry for different reasons. But I think Bollywood suffered.
Significantly.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you just see the disintegration of the entire media ecosystem there, right? Because you don't see anybody standing up. There is an environment of fear. There is an environment of being cut off from.
Yeah, no one wants to be culpable for.
Because if somebody, I think one of the actors, I think Amir Khan made a statement about political environment, and he actually lost. I mean, at least the brand that he was, a brand ambassador for, lost a lot of customers. So the incentives for people to also engage with this kind of thing has been reduced so significantly that it is creating an environment of fear. And when you have this environment of fear, we are bound to see loss of creativity. And then we sit and complain about why is Bollywood not making great movies now? Because when you have this fear, environment of fear, you are only going to create formulaic things that will work for a particular thing. So where are breakthrough ideas coming from? Where are, all of that, all those questions come about. And just not politics. Even if you look at societal issues that we talk about, right? Things like Great Indian Kitchen, which talked about gender issues. And when it was made, again, in Hindi, there was some kind of backlash around what should the role of the woman be and all of that. So even if you take it out of political context, even talking about, swaying or moving away from commonly held views is not an incentivizing or is not a very encouraging thing for movie makers. So where will we go from here? That's like a question.
Yeah, not to make a bad situation worse, Suman, but, one of the thoughts that I had coming into it was as much as we are critiquing how the trend sort of that we're seeing maybe in Bollywood, I was like, well, surely regional cinema and regional film can be sort of that ends up being a safe haven for filmmakers where there is opportunity and there is a higher, risk tolerance almost of dissenting ideas is a little bit higher perhaps in audiences. And yet, as soon as some of these regional films would become sort of pan-Indian films, you sort of see similarly that the ones that would do really successfully and really well would be,
and again, regional films have the regional flavor and so cater to a smaller audience
Yes,
than
yeah.
Their impact is also regional in nature. So the question is, how much are they perhaps able to influence popular imagination and
Right,
hence
in the same
democratic
way.
discourse?
Yeah.
And also talking about political censorship, right? There's also been increasing charges of Sedition and Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. And this was all pre-2019, but really the hammering down on
That
targets,
gradual trend really
Yes,
being seen.
yes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, sending agencies behind targeted people, again, just the disintegration of civil society almost, gives a very bleak picture.
Yeah, and in between all this, we saw other avenues for dissent. We saw stand up, that is, where small audiences, but people would make risky jokes or thing. But even our ability to take jokes has come into a lot of question in the recent past. So I think clearly we need to rethink what we want from mainstream cinema or role of mainstream cinema, right? So I mean, we don't want to leave this on a very pessimistic note, but I'd like concluding thoughts from both of you.
Yeah, so I think there have been other avenues for content, right? I mean, clearly Bollywood is not the single most way for people to find entertainment today. There's also Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and Reddit and multiple other forums. But the question then to ask there is, that's a rabbit hole in the internet. Is that
your own group?
And are you just stuck in that echo chamber of, like meeting like,
So I would argue, there's a difference between being able to walk into a restaurant, play music that's anti-establishment, and what that then does to democratic discourse versus needing to be, silent and anonymous and so on about it on the internet. Right? And I mean, it's like the preamble to the Indian Constitution, right? I mean, it says, we, the people of India, but it's really smaller we's, many. And
That's
Nitin
right.
said this in...
the bridging capital seems to be missing, like
Correct.
Nitin always talks about bonding
the
and
social
bridging.
capital, right? I mean, the social fabric of a polity, which is the Samaj, which is one of the three pillars of the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar framework, that really seems to be weakening. And what's surprising about most of these films is they have public endorsement. It's not necessarily just pushed down by the state. It's that, but also public support
bolstered
for some
up
of these
with
films,
public support,
which should provide a very polarizing picture of the state of our civil society as well.
Yeah, that is a sobering note to end on. Yeah. But I think there are always avenues for hope.
Yeah.
And
just as a concluding thought, we're not making the case that
all is doom and gloom.
All is doom and gloom. Neither are we making the case that Bollywood should be defended. I think there are other reasons for Bollywood's decline and downfall that might not necessarily political at all. But I think we're making the case that a clinical clampdown on pop culture is a bad thing for democratic discourse overall. And I think we, see examples for that. Yeah. Neither are we making the case that all artists should now be making politically aware anti-establishment films. Obviously, artistic freedom is important. But, the fact that we're so hard-pressed to find people who do this today is a systemic problem, which then affects our worldview, which is something for us to reflect on.
Yeah, I think you summed it up beautifully. Kripa, you have...
Yes, and I mean, maybe it comes as no surprise. I want to make an All We Imagine Is Light reference, which has come up now two times too many in a conversation with Suman. But I just imagine, what does this do for an indie filmmaker? What does it do for someone who wants to in some way express dissent with the status quo as it is, right? I think the human spirit is so resilient and persistent in ways that there will be avenues to make it possible, right? Like if it just so happens that this might not be even if it's not, reflected on a mainstream cinema hall like film and coming out of Bollywood, there still will be means for cinema to be a medium to express this type of dissent perhaps, although usually it'll be under the safe haven and protective umbrella perhaps elsewhere. So you'll have filmmakers possibly choosing to make these types of films reflecting on themes in Indian society that they'd like to share in mainstream society in India, but they might find audiences for it elsewhere. They'll screen it elsewhere.
Funding for it elsewhere.
They'll find funding for it elsewhere. And what's amazing is there's a significantly large diaspora, right, that's willing to hear and receive all of this. As much as we have contained our conversation to imagining domestic audiences, the reality reality is that the success of these films, I mean, has reverberated internationally. Like all these films like Chava and such, we are seeing resonance even internationally. But similarly, even in the diaspora, that there is a receptive audience to hear these, receive an idea that might be slightly more controversial, offbeat, or pushing back against the establishment a little bit. So I land hopeful, and I feel like even though it might mean that it doesn't look the way that we might expect to domestically, that the ways and avenues for which cinema can be used to express this type of dissent, I think that will still remain.
Yep. Change is constant. Let's hope that. And I think we should close with that. And we'll throw this open to all our listeners. If you have anything to say about this, of course, do write into us. If you have songs, movies, or anything else that has resonated with you with the theme of dissent, please do write and we can talk about it another time. Yeah. Thank you all. Thanks for listening in. Thanks, Shobhankita. Thanks, Kripa, for being here.
Thank you so much, Suman. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.